Policy of January the 4th, 2005, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make an attempt to answer the question, why are the American people so angry? I have been involved in politics for over 30 years and have never seen the American people so angry. It's not unusual to sense a modest amount of outrage, but it seems the anger today is unusually intense and quite possibly worse than ever. It's not easily explained, but I have some thoughts on this matter. Generally, anger and frustration among people are related to economic conditions, bread and butter issues. Yet today, things are going well. We have low unemployment, low inflation, more homeowners than ever before, and abundant leisure and abundant luxuries. Even the poor have cell phones, televisions, and computers. Public school is free, and anyone can get free medical care at any emergency room in the country. Almost all taxes are paid for by the top 50% of income earners. The lower 50% pay essentially no income tax. Yet general dissatisfaction and anger are commonplace. The old slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," just doesn't seem to explain things. Some say it's the war, yet we've lived with war throughout the 20th century. The bigger they were, the more we pulled together. And the current war, by comparison, has fewer American casualties than the rest. So it can't be just the war itself. People complain about corruption, but what's new about government corruption? In the 19th century, we had railroad scandals. In the 20th century, we endured the Teapot Dome scandal, Watergate, Koreagate, and many others without too much anger and resentment. Yet today, it seems anger is pervasive and worse than we've experienced in the past. Could it be that war, vague yet persistent economic uncertainty, corruption, and the immigration problem all contribute to the anger we feel in America? Perhaps, but it's almost as though people aren't exactly sure why they are so uneasy. They only know that they've had it and aren't going to put up with it anymore. High gasoline prices make a lot of people angry, though there is little understanding of how deficits, inflation, and the war in the Middle East all contribute to these higher prices. Generally speaking, there are two controlling forces that determine the nature of government: the people's concern for their economic self-interest and the philosophy of those who hold positions of power and influence in any particular government. Under Soviet communism, the workers believed their economic best interests would be served, while a few dedicated theoreticians placed themselves in positions of power. Likewise, the intellectual leaders of the American Revolution were few, but rallied the colonists to risk all to overthrow a tyrannical king. Since there's never a perfect understanding between these two forces, the people and the philosophical leaders, and because the motivations of the intellectual leaders vary greatly, any transition from one system of government to another is unpredictable. The communist takeover by Lenin was violent and costly. The demise of communism and the acceptance of a relatively open system in the former Soviet Union occurred in a miraculous manner. Both systems had intellectual underpinnings. In the United States over the last century, we have witnessed the coming and going of various intellectual influences by proponents of the free market, Keynesian welfarism, varieties of socialism, and supply-side economics. In foreign policy, we've seen a transition from the founders' vision of non-intervention in the affairs of others to internationalism, unilateral nation building, and policing the world. We now have in place a policy driven by determined neoconservatives to promote American goodness and democracy throughout the world by military force, with particular emphasis on remaking the entire Middle East. We all know that ideas do have consequences. Bad ideas, even when supported naively by the people, will have bad results. Could it be that the people sense in a profound way that the policies of recent decades are unworkable, and thus they have instinctively lost confidence in their government leaders. This certainly happened in the final years of the Soviet system. Though not fully understood, this sense of frustration may well be the source of anger we hear expressed on a daily basis by so many. No matter how noble the motivations of political leaders are, when they achieve positions of power, the power itself inevitably becomes their driving force. Government officials too often yield to the temptations and corrupting influences of power. But there are many others who are not bashful about using government power to do good. They truly believe they can make the economy fair through a redistributive tax, make the people moral by regulating personal behavior and choices, and remake the world in our using armies. They argue that the use of force to achieve good is legitimate and a proper function of government, always speaking of the noble goals while ignoring the inevitable failures and evils caused by coercion. Not only do they justify government force, they believe they have an obligation to do so. Once we concede government has this legitimate function and can be manipulated by a majority vote, the various special interests move in quickly. They gain control to direct government largesse for their own benefit. Too often it is corporate interests who learn how to manipulate every contract, regulation, and tax policy. Likewise, promoters of the progressive agenda, always hostile to property rights, compete for government power through safety, health, and environmental initiatives. Both groups resort to using government power and abuse this power in an effort to serve their narrow interests. In the meantime, constitutional limits on power and its mandate to protect liberty are totally forgotten. Since the use of power to achieve political ends is accepted, pervasive, and ever-expanding, popular support for various programs is achieved by creating fear. Sometimes the fear is concocted out of thin air, but usually it's created by wildly exaggerating a problem or incident that does not warrant the proposed government so-called solution. Often, government caused the problem in the first place. The irony, of course, is that government action rarely solves any problem, but rather worsens existing problems or creates altogether new ones. Fear is generated to garner popular support for the proposed government action, even when some liberty has to be sacrificed. This leads to a society that is systematically driven toward fear. Fear that gives the monstrous government more and more authority and control over our lives and property. Fear is constantly generated by politicians to rally the support of the people. Environmentalists go back and forth from warning about a coming ice age to arguing the grave dangers of global warming. It is said that without an economic safety net for everyone, from cradle to grave, people would starve and many would become homeless. It is said that without government health care, the poor would not receive treatment. Medical care would be available only to the rich. Without government ensuring pensions, all private pension funds would be threatened. Without federal assistance, there would be no funds for public education, and the quality of our public schools would be diminished. Ignoring, of course, recent history to the contrary. It is argued that without government surveillance of every American, even without search warrants, security cannot be achieved. The sacrifice of some liberty is required for security of our citizens, they claim. We are constantly told that the next terrorist attack could come at any moment. Rather than questioning why we might be attacked, this atmosphere of fear instead prompts giving up liberty and privacy. 9/11 has been conveniently used to generate the fear necessary to expand both our foreign intervention and domestic surveillance. Fear of nuclear power is used to assure shortages and highly expensive energy. In all instances where fear is generated and used to expand government control, it's safe to say the problems behind the fears were not caused by the free market economy or too much privacy or excessive liberty. It's easy to generate fear that too often becomes excessive, unrealistic, and difficult to curb. This is important. It leads to even more demands for government action than the perpetrators